This year, we are at this session having something that we haven't had before, and that's sort of trying to take stock of where we're at. This session, the state of college media, the future of college media, as I mentioned to you guys last night, came about when Charles Davis, our new dean, said he was available, and Dan Reimold is, we got him, and then Hillary and John were able to get signed on and piggyback. So we've got, I think, a good sampling of some people for the next 90 minutes to really talk about where we are today in college media. Their backgrounds, as you'll see in the bios, and you got quick intros to all of them last night, so I'm not going to go in detail about that. Some of them will come out more, though, in their conversations that they're going to have. Just for the sake of this conversation, even though it's going to zig and zag probably from the state of to the future of college media, I want us to sort of start in the beginning, just sort of taking stock of where we are at. Our panelists today, and they'll either speak from where they're at or they're coming up here, because either way we're capturing the audio. The thing will be for you guys is we'll have most of the time for questions from you toward the end of the session, and I'll ask that you come down here so that you can talk into this mic so that it can be picked up for audio, okay? So that's basically what we're going to do with the house rules. Charles Davis, our dean, will speak briefly in a minute. Thank you, Charles, for being here. John Reetz, thanks, John. And you're here through how long? The rest of the day, at least? Yes. Good. Hillary. And we're going to start with Dan Reimold. And Dan, I'm picking him to go first in part because I think he spends a focus on the state of college media better than anybody. I get a sense of where we're at by going to College Media Matter, the website. He has two hats he's wearing. One is the advisor in the teacher's role that he has at the university, and he's shifting from South Florida up to Philadelphia area, so he's making a change there. But I've asked him as much for this panel today to come from the College Media Matter. If you guys have not seen that blog, it's very, very rewarding. And we're not going to call up anything here today for the sake of keeping this as a conversation versus PowerPoints or anything. But Dan, welcome. Come up, start us off. What is the state of college media today? We talked a little bit last night about just where things are going, not just business models, but the whole attempt to remain relevant and the challenges and the issues that we're facing. So welcome, and we'll start with you.
Okay. And I wanted to actually start in 2005. In December of that year, Newsweek featured college newspapers in a story in its then print edition, which is a fairly rare occurrence among national mainstream media. The story, even stranger to look back on it now, was not focused on any particular event or controversial issue. It was literally just checking in to confirm that things were going really, really well. It featured an anecdote at the start about a student newspaper editor in Philadelphia who was controlling a $1 million budget, overseeing 200 staffers, happily sending them across the country to cover breaking news, and of course at the same time working with the latest high-tech equipment and software in the newsroom. The joke is that the anecdote at the start of the piece does not reveal that it is a student editor. By all the descriptions of what he is doing and overseeing, it appears that he's the editor of a top-flight professional paper. And then at the turn mentions that each day when he's done deadline, he quickly races to class. The most striking quote from the piece mentions, quote, "Even as the commercial press is hammered by shrinking profits, layoffs, and falling circulation, college newspapers are thriving." And for years, this held true at least at the surface level, or in a way that people were purposely avoiding seeing kind of the underbelly. They seemed to be remaining immune to the financial downturn that was plaguing the professional press. A ton of reasons were thrown out: the lack of overhead, their school support, the advertisers' continued love of the student markets, and their need to only break even in general and not have the ridiculous profit margins that at least used to be part of the professional press model. My favorite example of this disparity is a few years back, Washington City paper profiled 6 of the newspapers, the student papers at colleges and universities in the DC area. And the Georgetown, Howard University, of course, American, places we have a few editors here, a few in Virginia. The headline of the piece, though, set it off from Washington City paper. They simply headlined it, "6 newspapers that will outlive this one." Yet now, as many of us know, that disparity really no longer exists. And it's not all doom and gloom here, I promise. But a growing number of student press outlets, especially student newspapers, are struggling with their bottom lines. Last year, USA Today in a story labeled it, quote, a financial pinch. I do think it's more like a hard slap across the face or maybe a second-degree burn. If you believe the surveys that I know even some of you commission on your campuses that I've seen, students are apparently still reading their student newspapers or apparently still picking them up for the Sudoku or crossword puzzles at a reliable, surprisingly high rate. Advertising, though, is tougher to come by, again, as you guys know more than most. Related school budgets, in some cases, are tightening, in part because higher ed is also facing trouble, especially at the public state level. Student governments and directors boards are getting restless when looking at papers' financials, and that seemingly inevitable shift toward online only or digital first is also kind of growing as a drumbeat ever louder in a lot of editors and advisors' minds. Some papers are cutting or considering cutting the number of days that they publish each week or month. Others are reducing the number of pages they print, page sizes, or even just last week I talked to an editor who anonymously told me they were considering lowering the page quality that they publish. As he told me anonymously, summing it up, blurrier pictures, more ink stains, shoot me now. Number of publications are also cutting back on staff pay, perks like conference travel. A few have very recently appealed publicly, directly to alumni or supporters for funding help. Probably the most prominent at this point now, a few months before his death, Roger Ebert, a Daily Illini alum, and I know we have an editor from the paper, and not to pick on you guys because a lot are in this position, wrote publicly that the DI is doing some great journalism but needs some funding help, as a lot of others are out there. I know a number of other papers are aligned with Press Plus. That's the pop-up that shows up as you access a lot of student newspapers today, simply asking for donations. At least one paper, the O'Colly, who I know we have an editor here from OK State, have put up a paywall, where if you are outside that immediate area and you read more than 3 articles per month, you're paying, and trying to get some of that alumni and outsider support, drop a tiny bit of revenue and experiment a bit. Few papers have gone dark entirely, mostly at smaller schools or community colleges where related funding for the journalism programs have been cut, and a few others are very publicly fighting for their lives. Probably the most ironic example is the Hilltop at Howard University, which had been named just a few years before as one of the papers that will outlive the Washington City paper. They did a follow-up story saying we may be wrong. Now, to be clear, I do not believe this is a time of financial reckoning in the campus press, but we definitely have entered a period of profound, prolonged change. And I do absolutely believe, to sort of sum up, that right now all of us are witnessing or participating in the biggest shift in the evolution of college media since the student newspaper was first introduced in its recognizable modern form in the mid to late 1800s. It's fascinating that this is the time of immense change, not the advent of the internet era. For years at the college level, it has been newspaper plus. The focus from a staff hierarchy structure level, from an editorial workflow level, from the advertisers and profits level, and just that kind of in-between the lines gut level idea of what it means to get a good byline has been about print. With the web and later social media, and in a few cases now at some of your top flight papers, mobile experiments being kind of the plus, or the addition to that presence. The emphasis has remained print, print, print all the way. What we're finally seeing now are actual reinventions or new creations, as you guys know, that look unlike anything we've ever had before. If the past 15 years or so within student media has been newspaper plus, I do believe we've entered a stage now that I'm calling die, must try. After my PhD, I lived and taught and researched for a few years in Singapore, which I mentioned just to make me look slightly cool. I don't have much going for me. I ran cross country in high school, and I'm single now, and I don't believe that's a coincidence. Thank you. Thank you for laughing at my pain. I like that. Many locals, especially older Singaporeans, speak something known as Singlish. It's sort of a broken pidgin English in which it's sort of simple and at the same time translates things that probably make more sense in their native tongue. Singapore is known for many things: caning, no gum chewing, great economy, and so little crime that I love this. They actually have government-sponsored advertising campaigns to remind people that every once in a while there is crime. Because people will leave their doors, not even unlocked, but open. They'll leave their purses on the counters at shopping centers, walk away for an hour. So they're reminding people, sometimes bad stuff happens here. Government's checking in. They're also known for food. And among the Singlish phrases that are thrown out by hawkers, especially to tourists walking by, is the idea of food being die, must try. Or just that notion of it's once in a lifetime, and before you die, you have to give this thing a whirl. And it is is where the student press is at, in my opinion. We're all finally waking up to the cold hard fact that we have to reinvent, we have to figure out what we're doing. The weird part is that it's taken so long. You know, the first student newspaper, professional or student, to actually start a website was at the student level. The first blog was started by a sophomore at Swarthmore College. The first Lifecaster was a student at Dickinson College, also in Pennsylvania. She kept that video camera always on in her dorm room. Sometimes talked to the camera, sometimes did homework. At one point was cheating on her best friends with her best friend's boyfriend on camera. The first radio station, student or professional, to place content online and to stream it was at the student level. The first Converge newsroom, professional or student, was at the student level at BYU, called Newsnet. Obviously, we know the Facebook story, you know, and the idea is that we've had that innovation implanted within the student press and within individual students since the beginning, but we've been stagnant for a while. And now finally, with backs against the wall, there is sort of this idea of let's throw some things at it and, you know, see where we end up. And it is what I would call die, die, must try. So thank you.
Charles, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Die, die, must try. I like that. I like that. And if anything sort of summarizes where we are, you're absolutely right. We're sort of at a demarcation point in many ways. I think that the collegiate press was insulated to some extent. Sorry, didn't realize it was over there. The collegiate press was insulated somewhat, of course, by its reliance on, well, its happy reliance on full-page national advertising, right? I know in the community where I just moved from, Columbia, Missouri, for a long time, the student newspaper just beat our brains in terms of advertising because the Army and General Motors and Target advertised in the pages of our student daily. It was when that national advertising began to sort of crumble that true chaos came to the collegiate press as well. It was a little delayed, I guess, and that's probably why, to some extent, it was sort of a delayed fuse that finally lit. But now, I think the upside of that, and I'm going to try and put a positive spin on what I know sounds like when you go to these kind of industry gab fest, it's just a never-ending litany of woe. I'm going to try and break that up a little bit by turning it over and looking at it from a more positive light. One of the things I think that makes it a positive negative development, I guess that's the best way to describe it. We're all in the same boat now. There's no daylight between the collegiate press and the press. We're one and the same. Out of the chaos of the digital transformation, I think, comes great opportunities. No one on this panel, these are some brilliant people, none of us know what the future holds when it comes to where it's all going to land in this digital transformation. If you go anywhere and anybody tells you that they do, I would run away and grab a hold of my wallet because none of us know how this is going to play out. But I do think we can take a few things away from where we are, I guess, at the midway point of the great digital transformation. There are a few things I know to be true just based on talking to a whole lot of people within the industry and the academy. First of all, the industry and the academy are moving closer together, and that's a good thing. For a long time, there has been a big gulf between the people who study journalism and the people who do it. That gap is historical. It's sort of rooted in probably the arrogance of the academy and the arrogance of the profession. It's narrowing in real time. And it's narrowing in real time probably because there are so many former journalists entering the academy, in part, and also because we have shared problems, right? We're all focused on the same topic of conversation, whether we're in the ivory tower or the newsroom. Everyone is trying to figure this out. So there's a lot of brain power being dedicated to the question. It also gives us the opportunity to collaborate and partner like never before. I'll give you a topical example out of my own life. For a number of years, I had been talking with and thinking with a good friend of mine who's an investigative reporter at the New York Times about team teaching a class. He was game. He had been game for, 5 or 6 years. But when we first broached the subject with Times editors, the Times is a bit of a bureaucracy, not unlike a university. It took a while to walk it up the shop. As we did, we began to encounter more and more and more resistance. The resistance was not to him team teaching, by the way. Him just entering a classroom and spouting off, they had no problem with. Where we kind of pushed the envelope is we wanted to work collaboratively on a research project that might lead to Times content. Whoa, they panicked at that. You mean students are going to work on effort, journalistic effort that might appear in the pages of the New York Times one day? Well, that was the idea. It was a pretty radical idea. I guess it was almost 7 years ago when we first broached the subject with the Times. Along came another friend, another investigative reporter. We picked the idea back up in 2010. We found that everything had changed, right? The way in which those editors received our inquiries were much more welcoming and open. Senior management green-lighted it very quickly, and last year we did just that. We're going to do it again next year. It's a wonderful collaborative project that would not have been possible if everything were exactly the way it was in 1999, right? Their changing fortunes make them much more open to having these conversations. And it's not just the New York Times. If I can do that at the New York Times, you can darn sure do it at your hometown paper, right? So one of my first sort of practical pieces of advice to you is get thyself to your paper of record in your town and start having a conversation about some of the collaborative projects that you could cook up out of your own news operation. They're willing, they're ready, they're desperate for content. They are more open to these conversations than ever before, and they're a heck of a lot of fun to do. So I would envision lots of conversations about these sorts of collaborative projects. I think there are also more discussions and more potential around alternative models. Dan alluded to a few of them. There are going to be, in the next few years, we can bet, lots of alternative models popping up. I talked to somebody the other day who is seriously thinking about starting an endowment with a lead gift of, I think it was about $2.5 million to endow a college newsroom, right? That's going to happen. If it hadn't happened already. Has it happened already? I don't know. It'll happen.
There's been some nonprofit involvements, but nothing like literally a named endowment where everything's kind of done by that model. But
That's got to be in what, the next 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
I would think. Some sort of named endowment in a newsroom where you've got some money sitting there, allowing you to effectively break even from a financial standpoint, and then have the wherewithal from the endowment to keep your operating above the bottom line. I've also heard of a couple of different people who are considering, not committing, but considering more, what would you call it, unilateral sponsorship deals with major retailers, where retailers become underwriters of the product. I'm not here to say whether I think that's a great idea or not. I think it's fraught with ethical difficulties. It would require a whole lot of conversation, but it's indicative of the kinds of things that we're going to see coming on board, because everybody out there is trying to figure out alternative models. Finally, and I'll turn it over, but in our world, in journalism education, there's a lot of discussion these days of the so-called teaching hospital models, in which we serve as experiential laboratories for students working in workplace environments in journalism, right? And there's going to be a lot of experimentation around that teaching hospital model as well. Some of them, like the Mercer model down at Mercer, are full-scale, truly teaching hospital models. Others will be some sort of hybrid of that. Some of them will be independent classes with different faculty members who are engaged in these sort of collaborative ventures. But we're going to see a great deal of experimentation around that. I'll leave you finally with what I think is probably the most positive takeaway from this conversation that I can offer you. And that is when I attended Grady College and later the University of Florida for my doctorate, we were very much in the business of preparing print people for print jobs, right? It was a very gray and white world, in which we had one industry to serve. We served it extraordinarily well. It was a happy time. There was lots of money in newsrooms. Okay, that ship has sailed. The upside of that is that today we are producing journalists. We are producing journalists who can produce for any number of different settings, right? So you are being freed from your moorings to some extent, and you're no longer as siloed as you once were. Out of chaos comes great opportunity. And I see students who are pretty fearless and pretty entrepreneurial, able to go and do a variety of different things in and around newsroom settings because they are unafraid and they're pretty technologically agile, right? So I think that while we are in the midst of a tremendous amount of chaos, and sometimes chaos can get downright depressing, ultimately there are lots of positive developments as well. Okay, thank you.
Hillary Warren. Pick this up, okay?
Hi, I'm Hillary Warren. I teach at Otterbein University. We have about 3,000 students, and I'm proud that I have an editor here, Evan Matsumoto, who has promised to not hold up a sign that says BS for most of what I say, and I'll be paying him later. It's a little nerve-wracking to talk about great things that are happening in the newsroom when you have the editor of the newsroom sitting right here who can probably give a whole nother side to the story about what it's been like for us. First of all, Otterbein, like I say, it was a small school, 3,000. We're in the Columbus, Ohio area. We have a television station, a radio station, a newspaper, a magazine, and a website. We have a very robust program for a school our size. But I think, because I went to the University of Texas, I think we have had a lot of the same problems that might resonate. Too many projects, too many publications, feeling like you're on a treadmill, but the product that's coming out, it's something you're not that excited about because you've had to cut too many corners to make it happen. If your senior editors are feeling just besieged by helping younger writers get something out the door that's usable, problems with burnout, having all of these great ideas and not being able to execute them all. Have you guys had that experience? So that's been what we've been going through. And it hasn't always been about the money, but it has been about trying to get a focus so that we could produce some great work. Another issue that we've had, as Dan alluded to, is the issue of Newspaper Plus, of how do we get people to focus on the web and focus on getting those stories out first and not thinking, gosh, I was published on the web but not in the paper, and that means it wasn't as good. So we've had these challenges for quite a while, and of course we've had the same budgetary challenges that everyone else, but what I want to stress is that a lot of what's going on, I think, in college newsrooms is not just about the money. It's about the need to make decisions. Because the other thing that we have at the Tannin Cardinal, at Otterbein 360, at 1847, the outlets that we have, is that we have Mike Wagner, who's an investigative reporter for the Columbus Dispatch, and he and I have been co-advising together for about 2 years now, and that means that we do some really terrific investigative work, some stuff that Evan's going to be talking about in the next session. And I have a terrific and motivated and hardworking staff that are great coaches that will sit with freshmen and actually walk them through stories. And fortunately, because of the way we're funded, we're fairly financially solid. We have enough money to do what we want to do. We don't have enough money for extras without a ton of advertising, but we have enough money to do. And so we were operating from a position of real strength. And so we sat down at the end of this, sort of midway through this year, and said, you know what? We have been trying to get through one more week, one more term for too long. And this is not working for the long term. We had too many seniors who were not producing great portfolio pieces. I'm sure all of you would like to have that great story in your portfolio or that great series in your portfolio. You have ideas for that. Those didn't have a chance to happen. And so we bought a lot of food, because as you know, that's how you run a staff meeting. We had a lot of food and we had a lot of Post-it notes, and we only had a few arguments, only a little bit of shouting. And what I would like to do is sort of tell you what we went through in the process, because I'm a big believer when I talk to groups like this, I want you to have a takeaway. I want you to have something that maybe you could go back to your newsroom and say, this is how they did it in this other place, and boy, I never want to do it that way, or maybe it's something that you could implement. So we went through a process where we identified the goals for our organization. And one of the things about student media, speaking as an advisor, is that we have multiple goals. We have the goal to educate the students, but we also have the goal to do great journalism and hopefully not go bankrupt in the process. We talked about a bunch of the different goals that we had, and the key goal that we had was we wanted every single person on staff, every single person on our paid staff, to get to do a significant project every term. And that was a fundamental goal for us, that every single thing we looked at up against, would our staff all have the chance to complete a real serious project every term? It was like our sanity clause. So that when we came up with ideas, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do that, and then the flying monkeys show up, someone would say, wait a second, if we do all that, we won't get our investigative project done. We will not be able to do the story on the police records, or we will not be able to do something like that. And then the staff got together, and I didn't do this piece because this needed very much to come from the staff. The staff proposed a variety of structures, a variety of publications, a variety of publication schedules, a variety of media that they thought could help us accomplish those goals. And I came in at that point and I gave them the budget ramifications of each of those choices. If we, try to do a magazine once a week, can we afford to do that? If we do a full color magazine once a week, what's it going to cost us to print that? If we go web only and no print, what's our advertising base going to look like? And so I provided a whole bunch of budget projections for them. And then we got together and we matched up those structures with those goals with the financial feasibility. And we came up with something that was a little scary because, to sort of steal the thunder here, we decided to stop publication of the newspaper. But it's something that I think we all came out feeling like, you know what, for our audience, for our students, for what we're doing, this was the right decision for us because we could still accomplish the goals of doing good investigative work, of doing good stuff in terms of training students on analytics, of doing the kind of great work that we wanted to do, but still also support the staff and not feel like people were just running around and not really accomplishing anything. So what we moved from was a weekly paper, a not-so-daily website, where things were going up there not late, but people weren't thinking about that first, even though that was where we knew we had a lot of students going, and an annual magazine, to now we're going to be going to an intensively daily website. We've hired more staff on that side, we've hired more photographers on that side, and a quarterly magazine, a full-on glossy quarterly magazine, which we've already had experience producing because we started that a couple of years ago. This is how we came up with a solution on how to meet some of the challenges that are out there. When Cecil called me about this, I said, it's interesting, the future of college media, because depending on my mood, what we're talking about here I think is either really innovative or idiotic. And perhaps next year I'll have a good report on what that looks like. But I think the answer for every newsroom is going to be individual to that newsroom. I know that a lot of you, so much of your revenue is coming from the newspaper side that what we're looking at doing is just simply not possible. We happen to have in Columbus some real strengths that we're capitalizing on, and we have, because of my co-advising relationship, we have the ability to really push on investigations. And so that's what we've chosen to do. So what I would recommend is you look at the strengths that you have in your organization, you look at how you're going to build on those. And we're not all going to end up looking the exact same. The goal is not for everyone to still have every single piece in their portfolio. It's how we're each going to sort of accomplish our goals in our different ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary. John Reetz. John asked on this for a couple of hats he could wear. One, most recently, very active and met the editors from the Daily Texan here today. But so he's going to tell us a little bit about one of those new partnerships that are going on there. And also, John is the type of entrepreneur and advisor that if he chose big time, he could compete with Gannett or someone else and just say, I love college media. I want to get into that as a business. So John, talk about the possibilities, starting with what you're doing at in Austin, and then take it from there. Maybe what you're going to do with the rest of us.
Thanks, Cecil. Now, before I get into it, I do want to reiterate one thing that's been said several times, and that's about the value of connections that you make at this gathering. You got to keep the little list you've got of everybody's email addresses. You got to connect with them. If you're not on LinkedIn, you've got to get on LinkedIn right now. and connect with everybody on that list, and connect with me, connect with whoever you'll connect with. LinkedIn has 100 million. I'm not doing an ad for LinkedIn, by the way. They have 100 million people using it now. Way back when I was at Cox 12, 15 years ago, a bunch of us sat around a corporate boardroom and we signed up for MySpace. My profile is no longer on there. We signed up for the Facebook, that's what it was called back then, and we signed up for LinkedIn. So when LinkedIn hit 10 million members, they sent me a note saying, hey, thanks for getting with us at the beginning. You're number 602,137. Now it's 100 million. It's the best way to connect with anybody and everybody, and you really should do it. My daughter's a fashion journalist, lives in London, and she uses it like crazy. She goes through my LinkedIn. Anyway, that's enough of that. I can't out-cool Dan's Singapore thing, though I did have a minor in Russian, if that helps. But the Singapore thing is really pretty cool. I want to talk about the Daily Texan, but first I want Laura, editor-in-chief, to raise her hand, and Shabab, the managing editor, to raise his hand. I was going to go have a beer at the Globe last night, but I sat down with them in the lobby, and 3 hours later, we were still talking, and it was terrific. I didn't miss that beer. I enjoyed the enthusiasm and excitement from them. How we got involved with the Daily Texan, my history is the Daily Texan. I grew up in Texas. I was managing editor of the Texan when it got into a squabble with the Regents a long time ago, and we lost our independent nature. Regents wouldn't jointly renew the charter with us. We sued them, went to court, cut our funding off. We went through court about a year and a half and ultimately lost, and it's gone through several different variations now, but basically it's a part of student affairs and has been since way back then. But I've been maintaining a listserv through the years of people that from my era, people that I know, and people from different eras, and it's usually birthdays and, well, deaths, a few of those, but keeping in touch. These connections you talk about, they stay forever, and this spring the listserv started lighting up because there was a motion before the board, or a proposal before the Texas Student Media Board to cut print by 1 day a week because of the dire financial situation at the Texan, which is pretty similar to a lot of student papers. Well, you get a bunch of alums, some of them retired, certainly not me, but nothing to do, so they're all squabbling, and we are being taped, aren't we? They all start talking about, this is wrong, it's got to be fixed, it's got to be saved, and all that. For me, it was a bit of a personal quandary because most of my business now is built around digital transition for newspapers, building a successful digital future, which could be ground zero. Go into a paper, do a full audit on everything they do. You look at infrastructure, vendors, revenue, is the sales staff trained, what's going on with SEO, SEM, reputation management, digital services, everything. So I had a bit of a quandary, but it didn't last long because the Texan, if you're going to cut print, you have to have a digital plan at the same time. I didn't know if Texan did or not. I guess there's one now, and there's certainly one that Laura and Shabab are working on. But I've found through my years of consulting, I was with Cox forever, but you frequently will go into a paper and say, well, we're going to have to cut back, not necessarily a full day, but we're going to cut these print sections, we're going to cut this, we're going to cut that, so we can focus on digital. Then you ask, what's your digital plan? And there is not one. It's a really easy explanation for cutting to say we're going to focus on digital, but always ask for, well, okay, what's the plan? So we decided this alumni listserv that I've maintained got a little more formal and a little more active, and we bought an ad in the Texan, and TSM held off for now. And my feeling, I don't know Laura and Shabab's, but my feeling when that all took place is maybe there's a year to figure it out. maybe, and something will happen. It's kind of like what Charles is saying. All of this is going to be resolved. Professional press, college press, or whatever. None of us know how, and it all may be resolved by default. And it's been pretty ugly, so it may not get much uglier than what it has been. But everything's going to work through because of financial situations. What I think the Texan, what all of you want to do, what everybody on the panel wants to do is work it through in a professional way so you actually plan for the future, prepare, and try to turn it into a digital business as time goes by. But I will also interject, don't give up on print. You've got a focused community on your campus. You've got a contained community on your campus. A lot of mid-sized newspapers and a lot of smaller newspapers, and mid-sized and smaller would equate with the student newspaper generally. They're doing quite well on print still. Print's probably always going to be around to some degree. It'll just be a different medium, and maybe even less than what it is. Well, it will be even less. Print hasn't hit the bottom yet, but the fact is, y'all probably read plenty of e-newsletters. If you don't, you should start subscribing. Start with Net News Check. It's probably the simplest one that has a bunch of stuff in it. Digital is only 18 to 20% of revenue at quote professional newspapers. That's not much, and you never know what that figure means. Is that because print has declined so much that digital has a higher percentage? So there's different ways to get at 18 to 20%. But anyway, don't give up on print. I'm going to switch to the Daily Texan right now and tell you a few things we're thinking about doing and going to do. But I want to tell you first what we're going to do. We're going to be inclusive. Laura and Shabab are on the board of directors of our nonprofit corporation. We finally got the paperwork handled. We've filed with IRS for exempt status. We're going to raise money. We've got several people who went to J school with my era and went into other careers and made a ton of money. So we're going to call them first, and then we're going to raise money through memberships. A minimal cost for a student membership, and all this goes back to the students ultimately, some way which I'll try to define in a moment. And then tiered membership levels for whoever wants to participate and pay more. I think topping out at around $500. I'm sorry, and then maybe $1,000 for a lifetime. But what are we going to do with the money? We're not going to hand the money over to the Texan to keep the lights on. The beautiful thing about the Texan and so many of your papers is that many of you are self-sustaining. You are trying to make the business model work, because when you go out into the quote real world, you're already in the real world for sure, but when you go out there, you're going to have to do that in the business that you're in. Nobody's going to show up and say, here's $100,000, this will cover you for the rest of the year on this or that. It's not what you want to do anyway. But we are going to raise money, and I think we've got some pretty lofty and attainable goals. And we will make that money available, still to be defined by the board. So I'm not speaking out of turn since I am on the board and one of the officers, but it'll be, if Laura and Shabab have a need that is not budgeted, that in our view, and it's going to be a comfortable discussion, advances the educational aspects of the Daily Texan, training perhaps, something comes up that had not been budgeted or money wasn't available to budget, we'll help out there where we can. If there's need for product or utility or software, something that will help the paper that's not budgeted, that has come up in between budget seasons, or else TSM doesn't have the money to do it, we'll help out there. So it'll be incremental, but it'll be a decent amount, and we will help out. We're also going to, and Shabab and Laura and I were talking about last night, we're going to go in and do the kind of audit that, audit's a nasty word, and Laura and Shabab both know I don't mean it this way, but when I go into a paper, I've got a list of things, and you just run through them. Tell me about how you train your digital salespeople, or do you even have digital salespeople? And tell me how many digital-only ads you're selling. Tell me what you're charging, you know, that kind of stuff. Are you selling your archives? Are you doing photo galleries and making money off of that? So we're going to go in and, you know, do an audit. We're going to do it in tandem with the Texan staff, and we're going to give it to TSM. We're putting together a document to request that information in writing for TSM's benefit and for our benefit too. And then we're going to have a white paper. Now, whether anybody reads it and does a damn thing with it, I have no idea at this stage. But we're going to put together basically a set of recommendations and things for Laura Shabab and Texas Student Media to think about. And 3/4 of them are going to likely be business office, business model things. If the Daily Texan wants mentoring or guidance or just somebody to talk to about stuff, you know, we'll be available. We're not going to force ourselves onto anybody. We have all had our careers and have our careers, and I do my Daily Texan. I work with a company in the Netherlands and usually get up about 3 or 4 to work with them, and I usually do my Texan work about then. Sometimes earlier, and I'll be happy when we're done with this report so I can, you know, sleep a little bit more. But we don't have any great desire to recreate our college experience, and that's something we really want the Texan folks to understand. I think they do. The reason we're doing this is because I firmly believe, and those who are most involved in this believe, that we owe the Texans some sort of assistance if we can provide that assistance. My career would have been very different if I hadn't spent time at the Texan, and I've had a terrific career and done everything I wanted to do. And Laura and Shabab and the Texan staff now are the guardians of an institution that goes back to 1900. Walter Cronkite, Lady Bird Johnson, Carrie Elliott House, publisher of the Wall Street Journal, Bill Moyers. You know, a lot of people have come through there. And we feel like, honestly, it sounds altruistic, but I did grow up in the 60s. We feel like it's something we owe back to the Texan if we can provide something back. So, you know, I hope, if not in person, I hope Cecil next year will at least ask for a written report on what's happened. Maybe Laura and Shabab will be back as repeats, and they can talk about it. But our goal is to help out however we can and keep pulling for the Texan.
Thank you, John. We are about the halfway point of this session. Like I say, I want this to be a conversation, and I know you guys have got a lot of questions. If you would, kind of make your way over so we can come here, and more than anything, so you'll be down here and we can capture your question for audio versus walking the mic around the room and then trying to follow with the camera to get you guys on. So if you have questions you want to ask already, come on, work your way down. Yeah, I'm going to come back and start, though, with the first question to circle back on. I don't know that I heard any of you guys mention mobile. Where does mobile fit in this? Where do you guys get your first news on a mobile device, even though you're working for print and website dominated organizations? Is anybody doing anything with mobile? Does it fit in the content side? Does it fit in the business plan? And if so, what do you see the future of that? Any of you guys jump in and just work your way down?
Well, yeah, I think mobile is critical. I think for most of us, when we're talking about the web, we're including mobile in that conversation. Is that accurate? And so for our organization, and I think for most organizations, when we're looking at web vendors, one of the key issues for us was, what does their mobile interface look like? And we have actually been pushing our company that we are not going to their next version until the mobile site is rock solid. I'd also like to point out that Oklahoma State is fortunate in that they have a really terrific advisor on the business side, Ray Catalino, who's looking at pushing an advertising consortium for all of us in college media to improve our advertising ability on mobile. And so I think all of us are aware of how critical that is, especially if we're not going to have a daily paper or a weekly paper. You want something that people can have in their hands, and as smartphone penetration has achieved what it is on college campuses, mobile is definitely a part of that.
Now, that consortium is the College Media Association sort of
No,
helping coordinate that? Where is that coming from?
Ray. Ray for a long time, because I've known Ray for 10 years now. Ray has been pushing a number of ideas on how you can get universities to pull together to share advertising contacts, advertising revenue, and he rolled out this idea for mobile, and I'm hoping it takes off.
Well, having both that, and is anyone else here other than Oklahoma State yet with a paywall? I'm not aware, and I know you cited it, Dan. Are you aware of any other schools doing that?
No.
Okay.
Most
I don't
have
think
the Press Plus donation model,
Yeah.
so it shows up that it's voluntary.
Okay. Thoughts about mobile working way
I
down?
would simply say, look, if you're looking for inspiration, look to the Daily Bruin at UCLA. They're the undisputed leader among college media with mobile, just rolling out a ton, and it really follows their, what I call the full-scale model, which I can certainly talk about a bit more later on if there's questions, where they truly want to be the everything source for news and entertainment. And the biggest thing that the editors told me there was that they found success in not doing a mobile for them, but for what they felt the audience would want, which means there, and I guess a lot of other places, football. That's been the most downloaded app they've had, and they've tried to do some real-time game updates and lots of, is it Pac-10, Pac-12 stuff. They've found a lot of success with that, but they're experimenting a lot out there.
Yeah, we're emphasizing the calendar too. Have you guys had success pushing the calendar on mobile? No?
Anybody got calendars on mobile yet? Anybody raise your hand if you think you got something going on mobile, period. You're moving there. You're getting there. That's good. Okay, so show them hands. It's better than last year's hand raise with that question.
One thing on mobile, I think it fits into the do it because it's something you should try. You shouldn't just, a lot of papers, there's no money in mobile right now for most newspapers. The CPMs are not great. Some of the bigger papers are doing a great job with it, and they're doing a nice job with specific apps. But it's certainly an experimentation thing, and that's where y'all have the opportunity to do that. Don't look to make a bunch of money about it, but this whole session is not about making money. It is about survival, but don't expect much money for it. But get into it and learn about it and try different things.
The other piece of advice, I think based on what you've all said, is don't try and do everything mobile. Find one-off sort of narrow projects. Particularly football's a great entree point, right? So if you've got some sort of pre-kickoff app that drives the content that you have in your tabloid weekly edition, for example, or break some of that off, that's a really good idea and it's doable.
We've got one more that I wanted to ask, and then we're going to get you guys questions. And any of the others, you guys make your way on down and just name and school when you ask your question. Forget which one of you brought it up also, alumni. So far with the, we've still been primarily a geographic community on campuses, and as we shift more and more, what's the potential of alumni, in addition to John, the model to where you cough up money and you create a partnership like that? What about this whole shift of advertising? Is there much to be made just by taking a whole different audience to where suddenly the campus itself is maybe a part of the domain, but with just using Grady College, when you've got 20,000 alumni of Grady College alone, they don't really see the red and black that much. They've come to the website some, but I don't see a lot when I look at any of the websites advertising that's advertising by interest versus still back to more of that print-based, geographic-centered advertising. Just talk about alumni and any potential other than the way that John is talking about to maybe enter this equation and his advertising content as well to this group, an area that's being overlooked.
I would just argue that in the medium sense, and then if there's specific, that it really already has shifted. And I'd be curious to hear from you if you hold that up, in that there are kind of two camps, in that the print is still mainly for the geographic, the students, prospective students, faculty, staff, community, and then often the online metrics show that it's alumni, outsiders, again, perspectives checking in, and then, as you guys all know, and I know as I've blogged about a few times, the random communities who stumble onto the content and blow it up occasionally. So there really is already that driver. Now, as someone who stumbles onto a lot of student newspaper websites every day, I don't see much advertising targeting maybe older communities or alumni-centric, supporters and that sort of thing, but maybe others are trying that. But I do think it would be a worthy undertaking, depending.
Just kind of pulling it out of the air. What about the concept of taking, appealing to all alumni, everybody, through current publications, whatever, and setting up a Press Plus model for folks coming in from IP addresses outside the demographic area, just to get donations when they start coming to the paper. I don't know if it do anything or not, and it just hit me right now, and maybe it shouldn't have, but it's gone over my head now. But anyway, I just think, you know, so many people go back to the college paper to take a look. If they go back to the college paper and take a look and see that there's a donation appeal, some way, I don't know, well, not merchandise, it gets into a whole different thing with colleges, obviously. But anyway.
Yeah, what I would say, I mean, putting on my marketing hat is I basically look at alumni as another part of how we do audience segmentation. So just like the on-campus paper is what we offer to advertisers who are looking to reach students, when we have, you know, we occasionally have real estate agents who have a condo that they would like to sell. When they're not going to sell it to an 18-year-old, but they might sell it to an alum, or they might sell it to a parent, and for them we say, look, you should look at the website, because the traffic that we're getting is coming from those people. That's the audience that you're trying to reach. And so I think that's how, you know, we tend to think about alumni is as one type of audience.
Your questions.
Hi, I'm Skylar from Rutgers University, the Daily Targum. My question is mainly for Hillary, and since you guys said you're moving to an online format.
Well, and we've been online.
Okay.
I want to say we've
yeah,
been
so
online
you've been online,
for
but you're going
10 years
mainly
now, yeah.
online. My question is, how are you going to work or not work a 24-hour newsroom, so to say? And is your staff going to now work all day rather? Because I know for us, I still wouldn't be able to change like the 4 to 10 p.m. that we're in the newsroom. So even if we were just online, it would still like publish at midnight. So how is that going to change your staff, or is it going to change?
I think that's a terrific question, and we've spent a lot of time working on that. And I think one thing that's a little different for us as opposed to some of the bigger organizations here is that we've been weekly with a daily website. And so where we've struggled is trying to break people into a daily news cycle when the habit is very much things happen on Tuesday nights, because the paper goes to press on Tuesday nights. And so we have changed how our meeting structure happens. We've changed how the classes happen. We have set up more of a daily newsroom, more of a physical daily newsroom. This is honestly, my background is in radio, and so I have actually been wanting a daily newsroom for 10 years now, and I'm pretty excited about that. But you're absolutely right, and I think I mentioned this when we were talking this morning about leadership. Part of it is about establishing a schedule and establishing a structure for people to work within, rather than saying, oh, now you're just going to post all the time. Because what we realized is sending people home to post from their dorm rooms doesn't work. That we needed to have, so what we have are daily office hours, where there's someone who's always there to do that kind of work, which is something that those of you who have dailies have always had. For us, we're getting to create a new structure, and I'm very excited about that.
And I'd love to throw out, just because I recently spent some time in Oregon taking a look at what they were doing at the Emerald, and this is very much what they are stoked about. And they are actually of the mindset that this is actually freeing them up more. The daily model that they had was making it so that they would have stuff that they'd have to fill the space with to cover. And they feel like very much they're able to take a look back, take a step back, and just think, what do we really want to cover? What can we maybe now just do with some photos and throw up? And they've been covering things in a different way. They have now a speed team, again, working in shifts in the newsroom, ready to go, sometimes with a clue from the calendar events, and sometimes I was there when the Boston Marathon happened. That's a big track town, USA, big with running, and they immediately, got into action because they had some people there. And they also write, for example, like the football stories, using what they call not stories, but stubs. They put an immediate sentence or two up after a game and start tweeting it out, and slowly over an hour or two, once they get in quotes, more contextual information, slowly build this story and continually getting readers not only coming in over time, but coming back again and again, because of course the most impassioned readers will be curious to check this stuff out. And they've done away with beats, and have gotten onto what they call micro beats. So the idea of we don't have to fill section space as much anymore. And so now we can simply cover what is the main story that this year is happening. They're having an issue with their basketball arena not being filled up and Phil Knight pouring money into different things. We're going to cover that this year, and not simply the idea of sports in general. So for what it's worth, they've found it kind of freeing, with the idea that they're not having to meet quotas anymore or fill space, and they can truly just cover what they want to cover, and then also be there when the crap hits the fan.
Thank you.
Laura Wright from the Daily Texan. John, I just wanted to add a little bit to what you said. For student managers, the Friends of the Texan alumni group was, I think, a good example of when something negative was happening, and Shabab, feel free to jump in anytime, if something negative was happening and it was going to just happen in a board meeting and in the newsroom, and by bringing editorial coverage to it, we were able to make it into an issue that was bigger than it would have otherwise been, which in turn did frustrate our advertisers because they felt like we were dissing our own paper in the paper. But it ended up bringing a lot of national attention and getting an alumni group founded that I think arguably wouldn't have become an entity if it didn't feel this frustration. So I just like a takeaway for student managers. My question is, and this is a debate that we've been having all the time, is in a time where college media, which is traditionally so pampered, we get to write about what we want. We are given the excuse of being we're student journalists, but we get to be edgy as a campus publication. And the Texan especially, we really write what we want, and it's student managed, but we're not producing the revenue that we need to continue to do that. Where do we stand as student managers in a world where BuzzFeed is getting articles in legitimate publications about how it's the cool new thing and how they have some sort of a model? What do we do to make the newsroom understand that we're having budgetary problems without overstepping our bounds or without moving into the realm of the publisher that is decidedly absent in most college media? How do we stay student journalists while being revenue conscious? And are there any ways, any particular schools or events that you've seen where it's like, okay, that is good journalism and it also helps solve a bit of this revenue problem? Do those exist? Sorry, that complex question.
Yeah, they exist. I spent the last 14 years at a place that at the University of Missouri, that publishes its own newspaper. So when you talk about people who got up every day and thought about revenue, as our financial condition worsened, it was, every meeting every day among people whose job it was to build the business side of the paper, but also down the academic hallways every day, because we all had a shared interest in the Missourians' future and success, right? So there wasn't a conversation that wasn't about money. In fact, we sort of kidded ourselves about it at some point. What we stumbled upon, I think, that has worked fairly well. It's not pulled us completely out there, but it's done a great deal of good there. And that is going into sort of underwritten ventures where we cover things that are of deep interest to community, and we find advertisers who are willing to support that. That means we don't let advertisers write the copy. We don't let them dictate the editorial. But there's certainly a greater resource sharing in terms of us letting our advertiser community know that we're interested in doing, a 10-part series on the Missouri River flow, right? There's a sexy topic for you. We wanted to do like literally a 10-week story with digital components, video. We wanted to do a major blowout. So instead of just doing it and praying to the good Lord above that some advertising revenue came in, they went out and looked for interested parties who might be interested in supporting that piece of journalism without giving away the punchline, without saying where the series was going, without compromising ourselves editorially. I think we're able to engage advertisers in a more robust conversation about content. Now that's difficult, and it took a lot of conversation to get to a point of comfort around that. But now that it's going on, it worked quite well. The editorial side felt like it was squeaky clean. The advertising side felt like, hey, we got some heads up and we could go out and do a little work here. I think that could be moving us in the right direction as an industry if we got that a little closer together. I'm not saying, lower the wall and jump over. I'm just saying be able to peer over the wall long enough to be able to sell is probably not such a radical idea. Now I'm going to hide under the table.
To Laura's point, I do want to reinforce that. The Daily Texan coverage of their financial situation in the board meeting was clearly what got the alumni group organized. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. We've been teetering around for several years, sending inane emails about so and so's finally turned whatever age, and it was good. It was communicating with each other, but it's good to be involved in a cause, and if the Texans coverage made all the difference and helped us get mobilized, and hopefully we can help Laura and crew out. On the economic situation, it's a terrific question. I had the other than when the Regents cut off all of our funding and froze our funds for that brief period of time, I went into an industry that was flush with cash, and you didn't worry about anything like that. I had to get a picture. I was doing a story in Savannah years back, and the photographer and I had to get a picture of those big blue LNG, liquefied natural gas terminals out there on the way to the beach. Elbow and Elba Island, and of course they wouldn't let us anywhere near it because they knew what kind of story we were doing about the disaster in Cleveland that killed 50 people years back. So anyway, we rented Captain Sandy's riverboat for like $700 and turned it in on a T&E, and nobody said a thing. Now, what would happen if you rented a riverboat now to get a picture? I mean, it just doesn't, so, we're fortunate to live in a world where you can do things like that. Keith actually approved a few of those T&Es, and we thank you for that. So, it all gets back to how you define journalism. It's terrific that y'all are having to think about money. I mean, I think it's actually a good thing. In the post-Watergate years, look that up on Wikipedia if that doesn't ring a bell. In the post-Watergate years, the ivory tower world of journalism existed, and it was such a strong era for reporters and editors and newspapers, and so much of it was terrific. But it also was an ivory tower thing, and you were really, and looking back on it now, you're disengaged from the real world to an extent. You were on top of the mountain, do what you want to do, and and it felt a little too powerful, frankly. Now I think it's good for journalists to understand what's going on there. It helps them understand their community because they understand the finances of their newspaper, and they understand that ultimately the newspaper industry and the student media industry is a business. It's got to survive, so you don't want to fixate on it all day long. You want to cover the big story, but you've got to think of how do you build audience in a way that is true to professional quality journalism, and that has to be defined at each individual paper. Everybody's going to look at it somewhat differently. They're different. Quality journalism can be a really good events calendar, for example, and it can also be a really good investigative story.
When you reach that manager level, you can't divorce the money side from it. And it is what the employers are looking for in the most successful startups within the student press in recent years. How many of you have had some of your students in your school write for Next Gen Journal, for example? Now, of course, defunct. How about Her Campus? There's some chapters of that. I mean, money is involved in the more impressive startups and the people who are kind of getting people's attention, or at least the entrepreneurial spirit of starting something up, even like a Brian Stelter now at the New York Times, who started his, what became TV Newser. You want to be able to show that you're able to make decisions, regarding revenue generation. The only thing I would say is from talking even with some student media abroad, on the student level, bring different people into the picture. This is the time to reach out to the math and computer science crew, to get some data programmers on board, to reach out to the business school and to get more of the entrepreneurial-minded business people on. They might not be able to help at the board of directors level, but they might have some fresh ideas, and also show your willingness to kind of expand the idea of what a newspaper is, in modern times, for what it's worth.
How do we sell the newsroom on that, though? How do we get the, what?
Transparency. Yeah. Transparency. I think, and I don't think you display it as, a doom and gloom, we're all circling the drain, and there's no more pizza, and it's so sad for us. You make your costs transparent. You say, this is what it costs to do what we do, this is where the money comes in, and you treat them like the adults they are. And you say, here's the product we want to do, here are our goals, here's our budget. What makes sense? And what I found with my students is they have completely risen to the occasion, and we have partners coming over from the business department, and I think that is a huge part of what journalism education should be. It certainly wasn't when I was in school, where we delivered stories to readers, and readers were just happy. We just assumed they were happy, and that advertisers were, they were lucky to get to advertise with us. And we just sort of didn't think about that, because once we delivered that story to press, we were done. And I think you treat them like adults, and you show them where the money is and how that works, and it's an opportunity to really engage with the audience. Think about, how do we serve that audience, and how does the whole project fit together?
Well, the newsroom's a really important voice as well, and they can be a real break. I mean, yes, be experimental, yes, be innovative. That means you're going to be throwing a lot of stuff up at the wall to see what sticks, right? Having a break over here with a moral compass to go, whoa, wait a minute, is a pretty important thing too. So I would include them in that conversation very explicitly.
Well, thank you.
Hi, I'm Ashley Snyder, the executive editor at the Northern Light, which is the weekly newspaper at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Just want to start by saying that we are in a rut. I get the general impression from students that if we cease functioning, few students would notice, fewer would even care. So because of that negative impression, we have very few people who even want to work for us, and in turn we have too small of a staff, and our product is not as fine-tuned as it could be, not as extensive as it could be, because we don't have enough people. And then again, the cycle continues. People get a negative impression because the content is weak, and it's just something that we keep experiencing. I mean, we've tried tabling, sending representative to classes, job postings everywhere to try and get people to come on, but it's still not working. So my question is, one, how would you improve the reputation of a paper? And two, how would you entice students to work for you rather than just paying them? Because apparently that doesn't work for us. So.
My initial 4:45 today. We're going to talk about being cool and getting people, and we've got a few things that you guys have done well. So part of that answer will come, for what it's worth, on the content side. I do think it's about recruiting. I think it's the Juwan Howard effect. When Michigan was eventually building their Fab Five, their freshman dream team that ultimately did some great things in college basketball, it started with snatching up Juwan Howard. He was able to convince Ray Jackson and Jimmy King when they were on the fence to come aboard, and it just kind of went from there. Get some sort of prominent voice outside the box of who you would typically look toward, in your journalism school or program. Whether it is the graphic designer with a really cool idea for a new kind of student site, or someone who's been blogging. I think it was the Daily Iowan or Iowa State Daily who literally made some headlines when they hired the blogger who was constantly criticizing them, and then he became a voice for their paper. And you might want to think outside the box on who you bring in, and kind of let hopefully the tangential, kind of circular effect from that bring in, more, and then maybe the reputation grows from there.
You have a problem that is very common at, quote, professional newspapers. They're stuffy. They're older oriented. They're not exciting, from what you're saying anyway. And people, say they have trouble getting engaged with them. Non-traditional participants in the student newspaper. People who write an interesting blog in the community about particular topics or whatever. Something different. A lot of this comes back to your comfort level. How edgy do you want to be? How different do you want to be? What does your community want? What does your audience want? But it's a solvable problem. Sounds like you're going to solve it for 45.
In an hour.
Well, I'll find out later then. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Adam Ganishow. I'm the editor-in-chief at the Daily Mississippian at Ole Miss, University of Mississippi.
You would not have guessed that.
Yeah, if you couldn't tell already. Well, I kind of wanted to go back to something that Lauren was talking about. Lauren, I think that we're definitely in a gray area here ethically. I think you would all agree that this is kind of new. We're kind of blazing the path here in a wilderness that journalists haven't ever had to go through before, really. And I guess my question is, Dean Davis, I know you said you were talking about the moral compass that people must have. When you're talking about the advertising revenue and everything. I guess the question I have is there a line that we have to draw as editors and as journalists? Or has that line kind of faded, since the ivory tower, the Chicago Tribune brick wall, all that. Is there a line that, we shouldn't cross still outside of, writing because they advertise with our paper? So.
Well, there's that.
Right.
Let's stay away from just straight on payola if we can. But beyond that as well, I think when you have, the reason you have an advertising side and an editorial side is because they do need to function separately. And the journalistic functions of the newsroom do need to remain independent. What does that mean ultimately? Well, at the very least, it means that advertisers are not dictated. And we all know that we can't have that, and we've got to shy away from it because it ruins internally our credibility and externally our credibility. Beyond that, I think there are many encroachments that are still probably to be avoided at all costs. Right? You can take all of that and sort of put it over here, and there's still a whole lot of room for a lot more robust, I keep going back to robust, but a more robust conversation from the ad sales side, not into the editorial product, but heads ups about the editorial. I mean, we felt like we had moved a long way when we just got previews over to the ad side as to what we were doing over here so that they had a heads up. I don't think that is challenging the independence of the newsroom in any way. I think it's just good business workflow more than anything else.
As an editor, your own moral compass will guide you. I mean, you know what is right and what is wrong, and you're learning that in ethics classes, and you're learning that from reading and paying attention to what other papers are doing. It's I think this gentleman's right on target because there's plenty of room to operate and understand the business side of it and be worried about it and cautious about it and thinking about how do you grow digital audience, how do you grow print audience in a way that is not pandering to what you shouldn't be pandering to, whatever that means. Anyway, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Does this work?
Yeah, doesn't matter.
It works. It's only for the audio.
Oh, okay. Doesn't matter. First of all, this is my first time. My name is Ariel Hernandez. I go to Barry University in Miami Shores, Florida. Anybody else from Florida here? No? All right. Go Floridians. I just think it's wonderful how many young editor-in-chiefs we have here. Even if you're not, I'm sure you represent your newspaper. We are the future, guys. And I strongly believe that we can all leave a legacy behind in your newspapers at your school. And I've learned that from the past from my editor-in-chiefs. I'm fairly young. I've only been involved for 1 year, but I started as the web developer, then web editor. And the legacy that I would love to leave behind is actually what you guys were talking about, is the app. I did a tremendous move for our website from Dreamweaver to WordPress. And we're actually having difficulty as far as accessing it. Currently, only students, alumni, and faculty can access it. I partially believe that the school may be afraid of us embarrassing them or telling them the truth, making them look bad. So if anybody wanted to look at it right now, unfortunately they couldn't. You would have to have some kind of username and password, just like you would log into a Wi-Fi. So I'm dealing with the difficulty of having a firewall to get into our website. And also, not only that, but I'm working on a proposal to present a possible app for Android and Apple devices. We've got it pretty much developed, but what advice or tips could you guys give me as far as approaching that?
Well, to be clear, the idea of the app would be the conduit to reach the public. We would be able to access things we wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And does the school
Well, it's two conflicts.
that?
One is the firewall, and then if we can deal with the firewall, how can we access the app? You know what I mean? Because some of the solutions that we've thought of is having an alternative website that's very simple, probably just HTML text and image, and then have an RSS feed to the app, and still have our main website.
To me, it sounds like an end. Barry is private, right? It's very
It is
private?
private.
Okay, Barry's
School
private.
is.
I think, and do you have an advisor?
Yes.
Okay. Because what it sounds like is that your server is a campus server.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the first thing, is that move that server off campus, and maybe you should be talking with Frank and the Student Press Law Center about that. At one point, our campus started talking to us about maybe we would like to be hosted on campus, and I knew that, and I was able to make an argument about how that was just going to be way too much work for our IT staff to have to host that server. And boy, we did not want to clog their help desk up with all of those requests. And we were just going to keep our domain and our server, we were just going to keep that off campus so we didn't have to bother them. And what I would say is, for that sort of level of administrative issue, I think that's where your advisor comes in and can be helpful, because absolutely, as long as your campus, we can talk about the arguments for why your campus should be more open and why they should treat you like the adults you are, and all of that. But this sort of, what I would say is the most expeditious workaround is the advisor arguing to IT that they really just don't want to host you anymore, and that an off-campus host might be a better solution.
She's completely on our side, and I think that we've even seen the effects of what happens when big news comes out. A lot of times, images will come up on Instagram, on Tumblr, on Twitter, before even people read it in actual print. And that's one of the main reasons they even pick up the print paper, And you may be, setting the path for everybody. Just go ahead and go digital completely. Who knows how long print's gonna last.
Well, we're still keeping magazine because the revenue still comes in on print. Yeah. Absolutely, and we don't want to walk away from that. We don't want to, what you can make online, as all of you know, is not nearly what we're making on the print side, but it sounds like you guys are doing great.
Has the college been fairly explicit about the fact that they just want to control the content, and that's why they have a username and password?
The majority of being a private school is pretty difficult to release information out there, especially if you have a story that doesn't make them look good. In general, if a parents walk in during orientation and you have a student, first thing you see in the newspaper is, a student gets arrested, blah, blah, blah. And it's not very attractive to some of the students outside of the school, so it's just...
Despite the fact that the rest of us do live out there in that broader world where the internet exists as an open source thing. Frank, can I pick on you in the back? How often do you confront that model where there's a username and a password to access a website?
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Frank on my
Sorry.
Sorry, celebrity.
That is definitely a small minority of the college level. By the college level, the vast majority of education. Who here has a model like that where they have to go to the school IT department and anything like that? One hand, all right. So that's your answer. Almost nobody. That's a really unusual to get all of that. And Hillary tries to point it out like that. She gave you some really good self-interest arguments to try to make things. I'm sort of amazed that the IT department wants you guys on board.
Liability.
Right.
It's a liability.
That's probably the stronger argument. Self-interest. Like that's you want to mention that.
If they put virus in here or hack
Yeah, because if you do write something bad, they're posting it.
I would think you got at least 3 grounds there to make an argument. One,
Yeah.
you could get the numbers from Frank's group, I'm sure, on just how rare it is, how fantastically authoritarian your university is being, which is argument 1. Secondly, you've got the liability issue. Why would we want to have a server on campus? And third, you've got a financial argument, which is if we take this thing off campus, suddenly we open ourselves up to markets that we have not been able to sell to at all.
That's right. I think this year is going to be pretty big for us, and hopefully we'll have some positive changes and outcomes. So, thank you for your advice.
I would add one other thing about the server, and it just reiterates what you said. I would never have a server, and it sounds like it's not the case, never have a server for your newspaper that's managed by the university. It just doesn't make sense because of, you never know when it's going to hit the fan, and the IT department might get a call to turn off the server, and then you're dead. Have a server off campus or have a server with a vendor, and there are plenty of vendors out there who are very, very reasonably priced So if the contract is written by your professionals working with your paper, they may, you know, gosh, this is all scenario stuff, but I am a conspiracy theorist. But you know, maybe they call and tell the vendor to cut off the service. Well, the vendor's going to have a replicate of your paper, and then you get into who owns the content and all that. But while you're having that debate, you can quickly rebuild the paper and have it up within 24 hours. You know, even if you lose all your content. So anyway, just a thought.
And don't forget, you have the college community. There's FCPA, Florida College Press Association, CMA. I mean, depending what you might want your legacy to be, and obviously not to hurt your student status, but you know, I know Jacob's here from UNF, and I know we have someone from USF, and you know, there's names in Florida, people who would be willing to work with you, especially if you have the advisor on your side, and respectfully to at least maybe have them hear you out.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Kat Coyle from St. Joseph's University. We're the Hawk. And we are a weekly publication, and we are trying to do a lot more online presence, especially in the upcoming semester. But as we increase our online and hopefully grab more students, because right now we do have a lot of alum and parent traffic, how do we separate our print and still make it a fresh thing that students want to pick up? If they're going to be reading our content online, and probably more quickly than they would see it in print, why would they pick up the paper? Like, what are we going to do?
And something the Emerald publisher, Ryan Frank, told me the other day, they don't consider their biggest competition any other media outlets. They consider it the Facebook newsfeed, because that's where a lot of us go for our daily dose of things. And so it is getting their attention even through the social media sphere, which I know is difficult.
I think what you're talking about is a sense of competition that the professional papers have dealt with, as well as the college papers, is worry that somehow you're stealing each other's thunder, and wanting to say maybe we hold something for the print edition and we don't let it go online first. And I know that's how a lot of organizations have operated in the past. I think we're slowly breaking away from that. I think part of that is acknowledging that there are multiple audiences out there, and that you have your audience that is going to be picking up your paper and is going to go there first, and you have your audience that's finding you online, and that you're really not stealing one from the other. I mean, I get the New York Times, and I see stories that come up on my phone, because that's actually where I read everything, is on my phone, that aren't going to show up in print for 2 to 3 days. And it doesn't, and I think most of you are doing that, and it doesn't dim your desire to see that story just because you saw it early. And I think we've sort of created this false sense of, oh, we have to protect the paper from the web, rather than seeing it as one organization.
And maybe to answer your question also, Ashley is in, forgive me, Big Red, I forget your first name from the DM. You know, for what it's worth, like Frank and I were both just in DC at an advisors conference, including with some of yours, so it's kind of funny to see you guys here. And one of these speakers was Evelyn Gardner from the GW Hatchet, who's the ad business manager, long time in the business. She mentioned they are dropping from their daily or somewhat daily model to twice a week, if I have that right, or something like that. And half of their issues are going to be special issues. They felt after doing some background research that students were really geared up toward seeing something like that wasn't just another news cycle type of issue on the stands. So they're doing everything from orientation to some sports stuff to a best of Northwest DC, and so it also is good for advertisers, to even a pre-commencement issue, which I imagine is a lot of our biggest economic drivers on a given year. And so it, you know, just in case, you know, throwing out against the wall in case it sticks, one more way potentially to make the print stand out. And I know others have started magazine editions for that same reason of just, this is a special event that we are dropping into your newsstands, not the regular run-of-the-mill newspaper that's maybe now seen as a little stale.
Yeah. You do a good job with print, it'll enhance digital. You do a good job with digital, it'll enhance print. You market between the two, you push back and forth. You do exactly what we were saying. You go ahead and get stuff into digital as quickly as you can. A couple of years ago, I did a contract with a company with 30 small weeklies, and combined they had 1.5 million page views, and their editors had been trained to post right at the same time that they came out in print, and that was it. So it's dead all week long. They changed the pattern, started posting daily, and their traffic went up fourfold, went up to 6 million page views in like 2 months, and their print continued just fine. So it all plays together.
Thank you very very much.
Hi, my name is Dershawn. I'm the editor of the Daily Illini at the University of Illinois. I'm not sure how many people subscribe to print or a wire service, but we right now have AP, and we're considering dropping that for MCT campus. But what I want to do is move away from the wire subscription where we don't have to rely on that to fill our pages. So what I really want to do is kind of have a Big Ten consortium where student newspapers can share stories, share photos on a daily basis rather than what we do informally when there's like a basketball game. Have you seen a similar model in college, and what kind of problems do you foresee for that?
It's hard. Without UWire now being an active presence, the few I've seen, for what it's worth, I'm sure you have thought, one paper does the brunt of the uploading on time. The other papers fade away after a few weeks. It's extra work, and it just kind of falls apart. Not to be a naysayer that it may not work with the right, but I think it's maybe starting small, only a football content concern. You know, I think that's the ones I've seen that have risen up at all, but frankly, most tend to die out after the editors who conceive them graduate. Not to say that, you know, the time isn't right now, but.
It's a great concept, sharing of content. It's just everybody has to have the same passion and goals and desire to do it like you do, and that ain't going to happen. So you're going to have to, I think starting small is a great illustration. You know, do something, and then you've got something to show everybody else.
Yeah, proof of concept. Maybe go to 2 other Big Ten schools and go one-on-one with their EIC and, you know, shake hands on a deal. So you know them and you've got them. That way when you don't see your pictures on Friday, you can call and yell at them.
Thank you.
Make sure you work out the ownership rights as well, because the stuff blows up on the websites, like that falling bear in Colorado photo. Who owns it? You know, it can get messy a little bit at times, but.
I'll let my advisor do that.
Exactly, that's fine.
Hi, I'm Michael McKay with the Herald at WKU.
And the author of hilarious tweets.
Thank you. Yeah. So one of my goals as EIC this year is to create a partnership with the student newsroom for the newspaper, or not newspaper, obviously, the TV station. And I just happened across the latest Gallup poll that shows that over 55% of Americans get their news from television first, as opposed to 9% for newspapers. And I was wondering if there's a trend for other campuses to team up with television stations.
Americans are a rapidly aging population. Is that 55% overall, cradle to grave? You know, it might be more relevant to see, you know, how our students.
Sure.
You know, it just might be one thing to you know, keep in mind for what it's worth. But converged newsrooms are certainly a hot. TCU, someone's here, right? TCU 360. Kent State's been really successful with Kent Wire. BYU's been great. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely models for this out there.
Yeah, there are a number of models for converged newsrooms. The first one, BYU, ended up then deconverging. And I think the converged newsroom has, I think for a lot of us, been this holy grail that, you know, we all have been working toward. What I would say to be careful about, because I'm part of an organization that does have all of these. You know, we have the radio station, TV station, and we built a building specifically to create this whole sort of convergence. And what I would say to watch out for is what's the culture of each organization? Who goes to work in those organizations, which students go to work in those organizations, and why? And what's the profile of those organizations? And just to sort of give an example, and if this goes out on the web, I might get in some trouble, is that the students that I have, and Evan can attest to this, will put out a newspaper or post or hit the deadline with a magazine no matter what. No matter if there's a tornado that's hit the building, no matter if they're bleeding out of their eyes, no matter if there's a snow emergency and they're working out of their apartments, that paper is going to press no matter what. If, though, you've got another element that you're trying to fold in that has, say, a large professional staff that can save the students bacon in an emergency, or if they can flip to automation, those students haven't been brought along with the same kind of ethic. And when you try to merge those groups, that's where you can have some issues.
Would you say that it'd be worth it to try to merge, or do you think we should create our own division for our paper?
having looked at both sides, we are looking to try to bring in more video people of our own. And so sometimes we have people who work in both organizations, but the organizations stay pretty much their own. I'm not going to say it's ideal. I just think that's the reality of what it is for a lot of people.
Thanks.
Okay, we have time for 2 more, and then we're going to have some final, just run it by the panel one more time for any closing remarks. So you guys are the last 2.
My name is Michael Bragg. I'm from Appalachian State University. And my question might be specific to really only a few people in here. I have the great opportunity of being a returning EIC. This is going to be my 2nd year. I wasn't here at this conference because I stepped in like mid-fall semester. The newspaper was kind of like falling apart. I was rebuilding it as we were going. But we have a really bright future looking forward to next year, new advisor, new everything. Amazing editorial board. But the one thing I'm worried about is like a sophomore slump. So what advice would you have to a returning EIC or like just in general a returning editorial board to, you know, avoid that sophomore slump and to keep moving forward as a news organization?
Well, first you have a great advisor coming in, right, from SCAD?
Yeah,
so
he's still mad that I still learn.
Yeah, so I mean, so she's going to bring a lot of energy.
Yes, you do have a great
There's nothing a great half-day orientation with lots of pizza and goal setting and look at other great work within college media professional press can't fix in terms of getting people off on the right foot. You have to set some personal goals as well about kind of what you'd like to leave as your legacy in year 2. I'd say those would be 2 initial things to really lay out for yourself. And you seem quite aware of the idea of not wanting to fall into that slump, so I think you're already a couple steps ahead of the game. And with an engaged advisor, it sounds like I would think you're going to be fine. But
That'll be a terrible legacy falling behind.
Dan said it perfectly. I mean, you're already thinking about that, so you're 2/3 of the way to solving that problem. Goals, what are you going to do? Planning, be inclusive, get everybody all together, make sure everybody's participating.
And once it was overheard an editor's roundtable once, where one of the things a few of the students said is that they often tried to think of something big picture, but then something specific, a 3-part series that they wanted to lay out and just go gung-ho right away and just kind of set the tone.
Yeah.
And have something to build the foundation. I think like Dean Davis was kind of saying earlier, just kind of starting small in that sense and then building on that from there.
Because the temptation in every editorial planning meeting I've ever been in is to do everything. And then you walk out overwhelmed. So you set a numerical goal. We're gonna come up with 6 series to do over this semester today. We're gonna, or in the next week or whatever. But because otherwise it becomes this, and those are really fun. Those sort of freewheeling brainstorming sessions. But then you walk out with, we're gonna write the Bible backwards in the next 2 weeks. It's a little much.
Yeah, set goals that are attainable, and then maybe throw in a stretch goal that will challenge everybody.
Thank you so much.
I'm Jacob Harn from Jacksonville. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Spinnaker there in Jacksonville. We are actually also, we've been going through the convergence model, and my first experience in journalism has been at the college level, so I can't say if it's better than other models, but either way, I'm willing to talk about how it works for us. And we are actually doing a very similar transition as you are. We're going daily online and doing a monthly magazine. And also we are, God willing, if we continue to be funded and make revenue, we're coming up with like a doomsday sort of plan just in case. Right now our university gives us editorial control, or allows us editorial control, and they don't interfere too much, but we have been mapping out a plan to go independent, and that's something that I've been talking to Frank about, how, whether or not an internal agreement is legally binding, and so far it's I guess it's not, but I guess while I have everyone from so many schools in here, I was wondering if, John, I know you had mentioned that, I'm wondering if, excuse me for the stuttering, you said the legal action that you tried taking years back, you said the regents wouldn't renew their charter?
That was a unique situation.
Was
Daily Texan at that point was under a 50-year charter with the Board of Regents, joint renewal to renew for another 50 years. They didn't renew because we'd aggravated on some stuff. So that was a bit unusual, a different, yeah, very local situation, but I'm not sure if that, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I guess,
We took legal action because it was the thing to do, but we lost.
okay. I guess that's it. We did a survey to see what students' opinions are, and we have like 470 students, so I'm willing to share those results with you as well. So.
All right, good questions, thank you. Well, we've hit and gone 5 minutes over our time, but I want to give a final rundown of the table for any closing comments. State of, future of college media, anything that you either want to reiterate or introduce that we haven't already touched on? Charles, start with you this time.
Well, I was particularly delighted by the questions as much as the comments. And I'm struck by the spirit of experimentation in the room and the willingness to innovate. Just keep trying. Keep experimenting. We're going to get there.
The awareness of this group is what impresses me. I mean, last night listening to y'all introduce your person to the right, you've got a grasp on public speaking and being involved. You're in a visible role. You're also dealing with stuff that we didn't have to deal with when you and I were back at the Daily Texan. And but it's also an incredible opportunity because you're going through stuff that will make you a better person. It's that old what doesn't kill you, makes you better, or whatever that thing. but it's a great opportunity that you are going. It may not seem that way now, and I don't have to tell you to have fun doing it because I know you will.
Yeah, I agree. It was incredibly interesting to hear the introduction. Just someone in here literally knows Kung Fu. Was that? Okay. Love your paper. I think the comment from, again, the gentleman from Daily Mississippi and from Ole Miss about it being a gray area, it just struck that it's one more gray area that the student press has faced since the beginning, and especially student newspapers. Whether it's been the introduction of new technology and competition like radio and television to the fighting of several world wars and suddenly cutbacks in the same kind of spirit as now on printing and figuring out how to fill staffs to taking a real charge in civil rights and eventually sort of sexual rights. There have been a lot of gray areas, and the student press truly has been at the forefront of a lot of this. And I can geekily say in an excited way as someone who reads your content a ton that it really is you guys and your staffs who have been at the forefront of a lot of great change. And so I really do think there's a lot more great stuff to come.
Wow, since I have the last word, which is kind of daunting. What I guess I would say is that one thing to think about is how is this experience positioning you for when you graduate? And what all of you are going to be able to say is that you guided an organization through transformational change. And that is huge. And that's going to mean that there are going to be some mistakes and you're going to look back and wish you'd done something a different way. But what an amazing opportunity all of you have that then you can use to position yourself career-wise once you graduate. So I would look at this as an opportunity rather than something that you want to run from. This is an amazing opportunity.
Let's take our panelists.